Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast, and you join us for episode 3 of, believe it or not, series 14, or I suppose if you're from the States, season 14, where we're currently thinking about objections to the historic Christian sexual ethic that sex is to be reserved for the marriage of a man and a woman. And we're working through some of the most common objections to that. And today we're looking at the theme, doesn't this view do more harm than good? And I'm delighted to be joined by Ashleigh and Adam. So, Ashleigh and Adam, how are you today?
Morning, Andy. I'm a little bit ill, but I'm powering on through.
And Adam, I can't actually see you because we've got internet issues, but how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you very, very much, Andy. It's good to be here.
Good. Well, I say this series is all about objections, potential areas of disagreement. So to kick us off, I thought we'd discuss areas of disagreements in other places that might cause people to object to our views. So, Ashleigh, have you got something you violently object to that other people might find controversial?
More something that I think the two of you are going to violently object to. Kind of a hill I'm willing to die on would be some form of defending Twilight as a series.
Oh, you're right. That is disgusting.
Yeah, I thought that might be the reaction. Objectively, it's not good. I'm just going to put that out there. I know it's not good, but it caught me at exactly the right point in my adolescence. And so I ignore all the reasons it's not good. And to me, it's just absolute gold. And I love it so much. I just rewatched all the movies. I just reread a bunch of the books. Had a great time.
Obviously, I have no idea what you're talking about. But anyway, it sounds like I probably would object to it. So
I think you would, Andy. I'm not even going to explain it to you. I think
that's fine. Adam, have you got a controversial opinion?
Obviously, I don't think this is controversial at all, but I would say the hill I'm ready to die would be for bullet journals. An organizational system where you combine your diary, your journal, and your to-do list all in one place, and it's not on a phone. Boom. It's called a bullet journal. Come on.
See, I like organisation, and I like not doing it on a phone, but the idea of combining a journal and a to-do list, brings me out in hives. I can't cope with that. That's too much.
I sort of agree, although, to be honest, Adam, I know you are passionate about this, and I've consumed more hours of my life than I care to remember thinking about bullet journals as you've told me about them. I mean, mine is, and to be honest, I can go on about this for hours, is that basically barn dances, ceilidhs, anything that involves sort of close physical contact with hot, sweaty people you don't know are to be avoided at all costs. And if Christians are getting married, they should be banned from insisting their wedding guests have to participate in some form of barn dance or ceilidh as though it's the greatest joy in life ever. And to be honest, if people disagree with me, they are just wrong on that. So yeah. Do you love them, Adam? Are you secretly really fond of them?
Secretly? very, very, very publicly fond of them. Yes. Got to move, got to dance. And a barn dance is a joyful way because they tell you what to do.
Yeah, that's my issue. I don't like being told what to do, probably. Anyway, let's move on to more important areas to think through. So, I say this is season or series 14 of the Living Out podcast. So, some of the issues we're talking about today, in terms of whether a Christian view of sexuality does more harm than good, we have covered in different forms previously, mainly actually through the voices of our colleagues. So, as it happens, the three of us haven't spoken much about this. So, if you would like to find out what our colleagues think about similar topics, then again, the various previous episodes will be in the show notes. But I want to pick up with Adam and Ashleigh. This view that a Christian sexual ethic does more harm than good, and that suggesting people either need to be married to somebody of the opposite sex or to stay single and celibate. How have you heard that view expressed, that this does more harm than good? Ashleigh, do you want to kick us off?
I guess one obvious one, and one that we've talked about before on the podcast, would be kind of in the conversion therapy sort of realm. So for people like us, same-sex attracted people, where for some of us opposite sex marriage just doesn't seem to be an option. But then the assumption is that celibacy is bad. We then end up in this situation where people are saying, oh, we need to make you straight so that you can engage in an opposite sex marriage. And in many spheres and many chunks of not so distant church history, there's been a lot of damage done to a lot of people through that kind of thinking. So that is one sort of harm that I've kind of have heard about or have seen. I think another thing kind of related to that is that assumption of the value of marriage, and that it's almost the pinnacle of the Christian life. Like that's the goal. That's what we're aiming for. Can lead to, and I was going to say almost, but I think it just is, an idolatry of marriage within our churches. And we kind of make the single life something that is less valued and less plausible as a result, actually, because if the support is not in place for single people, if we're not building a community that works for single people, because we think, well, surely the norm is marriage and the goal is marriage and that's what we should be pushing people towards, that can cause a lot of harm and has caused a lot of harm, I think. And again, that's something I've seen in many people's lives.
Adam, how's it been expressed for you?
Well, it's interesting. It's pretty important to note that it's the manner in which it's expressed and held which is the problem. Because actually, the Christian sexual ethics of marriage between one man and one woman, or we're all called to singleness and celibacy, is actually a beautiful, wonderful ethic. And on one level, there's actually nothing wrong with that ethic at all, and it hasn't done any harm ever. It's actually led to us flourishing. The problem is, it's when human sin starts to manipulate that view, either from external or internal realities. And I think Ashleigh's really helpfully spoken about how the external pressures of other people's expectations, and even in very cruel ways through certain forms of conversion therapy, how that can be very problematic, and that is a sin. But also then there's the internal sin as well, when we turn marriage into something it's never meant to be and make it into some sort of idol, hoping that this marriage is going to fulfill me or complete me, or make me completely happy and satisfied. And actually, no human marriage can ever do that, because we're just expecting too much from it. So I think that could be quite a poisonous internal sin, which sort of damages our relationship with this view.
People can end up carrying a lot of shame as well. Like if that's, as Adam's just said, if that's the way that we're thinking, like it's a God has said something good, but we've made a mess of it. And if we're thinking in those ways, if someone is same-sex attracted, or if someone is opposite sex attracted but is single, there can be that sense of shame of, oh, I'm not able to kind of live up to this. I'm not able to meet this standard that everyone in church says I should be meeting, or things like that. And maybe, a lot of kind of shame about themselves and about their lives that can creep in, which obviously is not what God would want for us, but shame in itself can cause a lot of damage to us. So if we've internalized that in some way, that can be a problem as well.
Yeah, I think it often works at two levels. So for some people, there is just the fear this is creating major harm, as in people who might be gay, same-sex attracted, basically just hating themselves, sort of loathing something that feels very much part of them in a way that does long-term mental health damage. So I've heard it expressed in that way. I guess lower down than that, I've heard it expressed in, well, isn't it just a shame? Isn't it sad? People won't get to spend their life with the person they seem to love most, and there's just that's just really sad. I've heard that said by a number of friends to me, actually. Well, isn't your position on life just slightly sad, Andy? Shouldn't we feel really sorry for you? And this isn't what is best for you. And so over the years, I've seen it expressed that this is causing major mental health issues. This is causing serious harm, through to, well, it's just a bit sad, isn't it, really? And wouldn't it be better if you could spend your life with the person you were most sexually attracted to? How does it work for us personally? So are there times where, to be honest, maybe in the middle of the night or something, you begin to think, actually, is this doing me more harm than good? Have you ever got there at any point?
I think for me, again, it's wrapped up in those poor understandings of, or poor outworkings of, what God has to say about this. So for me, in friendship, there's often there's kind of in church settings like a fear of some kind of crossing the line or of not being above reproach, and we kind of want that in our friendships. And the way that works for people who are opposite sex attracted is if you kind of have men and women a bit separate, and friendship between men and women is not encouraged. But then for someone like me, I am usually attracted to women, but I'm occasionally attracted to men as well. And so people don't really know what to do with me sometimes in that setting. And I've had someone sit me down before and say, kind of question one of my female friendships that was just kind of physically affectionate. And I was kind of left saying, well, what kind of friendship am I allowed to have? What kind of intimacy am I allowed to have in that setting? You know, do I just not have any intimate friendship at all, which would be harmful and damaging? So we were able to have a really good conversation about that. And thankfully I'd already kind of thought that through for myself, and I was comfortable with where I was. But, you know, if I'd been younger or more impressionable or something, that could have actually set my life on a whole different trajectory where intimate friendship was something that almost I avoid completely. And that would have done me a lot of harm, I think.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think because there's nothing wrong with this view, this teaching, it's how my sinful self interacts with it. I think there's been moments in life where I've thought just way too highly about marriage, and sort of assumed that any life outside of the married life is basically a meaningless life. It's devoid of real friendships, devoid of real purpose, and real satisfaction. And then that's made me angry at God. That's made me fundamentally add to my sin of a misunderstanding of His word and His teaching on marriage. It's then added that I've then had a negative relationship with Him because of that. And I've actually had a wrong view of God and thinking that in some way He's cruel for not enabling me just to find sexuality a really easy, simple thing. Um, and so I personally had to struggle with that, and actually had to repent for how I thought about God because of His teaching, because of my own because of my own sinful reaction to it.
I can empathise with quite a lot of that. I think in two ways. Funnily enough, for me, actually, it is generally weddings are the things that kick me off into. I was at a wedding last week. It was a really good wedding, and then sort of mate of mine had sort of put, best day of my life all over his sort of social media, and I was genuinely really pleased for him. But it did kick me off thinking, do I ever get a best day of my life, if that makes sense? And now, in a sense, that wasn't a major thing, but probably in previous years when I was younger, that became massive for me, such that such that it probably did distort my view of God's goodness and so on, and I found that pretty hard, if I'm honest. I guess overall, though, we don't think this is currently doing us more harm than good. Otherwise, we're slightly weird individuals to persevere in it. So, why overall do we think that the Christian sexual ethic is good for us rather than harmful for us? Let's start personally, and then we'll talk more broadly in a minute. So, why personally do we think it's been good for us? Adam, do you want to start?
Well, on one little simple level, I think on society wide, like I'm glad we got the sexual ethic because it means I'm here.
That's
It
true.
means we're all
Yes,
here.
and we're glad you're here.
Thank you, Andy. On a personal, maybe more personal level, like it gives me a real clear sense of how to live. Like I don't have to fumble in the dark trying to establish what the good life looks like. I can actually find full satisfaction in life within God. And actually, His word then makes it really clear in that state of someone who is loved and chosen and known how to then live. Like, either I'm going to live as someone married to someone of the opposite sex, or I'm going to live as someone who's single and celibate. And I just am so grateful for that clarity. Like, God is just so kind to me. He doesn't want me stumbling around, He doesn't want me making loads of sexual mistakes. He actually wants me to live a pure life for His glory, where I have a clear sense of how I'm meant to live each and every day.
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines. Like, because God is so clear about this, it keeps me from sin. Like, if this is what God says about sexuality and the ways in which we're to express sexuality, then disobeying Him in it would be sinful. Doing something else would be sinful, and sin is the most harmful thing that there is. If we're talking about what causes harm, it's sin. Sin is everything that is wrong with the world. kind of the root and the result and the power of every harmful thing that is in the world. So God's clear teaching on marriage and on sexuality and on sexual sin actually keep me from harm. It keeps me from sin, which I think is pretty good. It also, because I've had to think through singleness and intimacy and friendship in a different way than I would have had to if I was married, because we have this cultural setup where people go, oh, I'm married, that means I have intimacy. Oh, I'm married, that means I don't kind of don't need to have my needs met anywhere else, which I do think is faulty thinking, but it's something that is far more in your face when you're single. It means that I've had to think through friendship really deeply, and it means I have an incredibly high value on friendship that just shapes my life and, as a result, my friends' lives so profoundly. Like one example, I have a chronically ill friend, and she had a really big trip recently. She had to do 2 4-hour drives over a weekend to go to a wedding, and she was already exhausted before she left, and it was far too much. It completely wiped her out. It was kind of, as these plans came to light, it was too late for me to join her this time and share some of the driving and things. But I said, well, next time you have something like this, just tell me, and I'll go with you, and I'll share some of the drive, and you go to the wedding, and I'll have a fun day out wherever we are, and make a weekend of it. And to me, that's just a completely normal thing to say to my friends, because that's how my friendships work. That's what we do. But to her and to someone that she shared it with, that was actually a little bit stunning. Like, this is the kind of thing that you would expect a partner to do for you. This is the kind of thing that you expect to miss out on as a single person. It's the kind, you just kind of have to do it all yourself when you're a single person, is the thinking. But that's not how friendship works in my life, across my friendships. I value my friends. I value my friendships very highly. We do these kind of things for each other. And as I said, that's because I've had to think about intimacy and family and what makes life more or less plausible for us as single people. So all that to say, yes, this view has done me good in that sense. It's resulted in all these deep, rich, fun friendships, which are honestly the greatest gifts in my life.
I just think there's something about the Christian life which means we're not surprised when something that appears bad for us is ultimately good for us. So, when Jesus says, whoever loses their life for me will gain it, that's just been such a foundational verse for me, because it means I'm not surprised when living the Christian sexual ethic feels in the short term like losing life. I don't get the best day of my life at a wedding. I don't have the immediate sense of, there's somebody at home, when I come back from somewhere. I don't think we should be surprised that there will be short term, this feels like I am losing life. I don't think we should feel bad about that or discouraged by that. I think that's just part of the way the Christian life works. But overall, for me, I would say, in losing a sexual relationship with somebody of the same sex, I've definitely gained life. And I totally agree with you, Ashleigh, in terms of the friendships that I get to enjoy. All my married friends kind of wonder, how do you have so many friends? And I don't think they're just picking up my sort of antisocial nature. I think they're just sort of picking up, they're amazed that I have the time for that. And just, that ability to empathise with other people who don't have what they might want in the short term. That's just been a huge privilege for me over the years, and would have been impossible if I wasn't living out the Christian sexual ethics. So, and that's quite apart from gaining Jesus. So, so is there short-term feelings of harm? Yes, I think there probably is. That shouldn't surprise us, because ultimately that's the pathway to gaining life.
We are so excited about Kaleidoscope, the series that gives you the chance to wrestle with big questions about sexuality, gender and faith.
People often ask us, are you kind of living a lie because of my sexuality?
I was always rebelling against this idea of being a female, I think because I felt so different from the other girls.
Kaleidoscope is a video-based series for use in youth groups designed to help young people explore big questions on sexuality, gender and faith.
The actual relationship that I left in order to follow Jesus was with a woman that I intended to spend the rest of my life with.
Each episode has real-life stories, engaging teaching, and a panel discussion. And alongside the videos, there's training, episode guides, take-home sheets, and a load of bonus material for use before and after the series, giving churches everything they need to help young people explore these big topics.
And when I became a Christian, read the Bible for myself, I saw, no, you know what, there's actually a much bigger story going on here.
We turn to him as sinners, and actually he responds with grace and with love.
In the second part, we want to talk about one aspect of harm that I don't think we've touched on in the Living Out podcast before. Often as you see churches that have moved away from the traditional sexual ethic, they've kind of said, well, this is essential if we're going to do mission. If we're going to meaningfully talk to people in the 21st century, we can't have an outdated sexuality model sort of being like a sort of chain around our ankles. And so do you think that's right? Do you think this view that we're holding causes harm in as much as it prevents people from becoming Christians? Adam, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, well, thankfully we can look at the stats and we can see that that's not true. When we look at, so let's say the Church of Scotland, which took a more liberal stance on marriage much earlier than some of the big denominations down here in England. Actually, the Church of Scotland has just been plummeting ever since they've made those decisions. And actually, it's the churches within Scotland which hold traditional views on marriage, which actually have been thriving and are in a far healthier sort of position. So, like, based on the stats, I don't think there's any evidence that actually changing your view on marriage is going to help people come to know the Lord Jesus Christ. Like, in my own town where I am, like I can't actually think of a single church around here who takes a liberal view, which is in a healthy way. And I'm not saying there's none out there. I'm sure there must be some, but it's just quite telling, isn't it, that actually churches change their position on marriage, saying, "Oh, this is crucial for evangelism," and yet why don't the people start flocking in?
I think we need to remember what the central issue is, or what the central question is. Like, when we are sharing the gospel with people, we're not saying, hey, come live in line with our sexual ethic. We're saying, hey, there is a God who created all things, and he was born as a human, and he lived and he died and he rose again. Like, that's the fundamental thing. Did Jesus really rise from the dead or not? Is Jesus really God or not? Because if Jesus was a liar, or if Jesus was delusional, or if he didn't exist, then who cares what he says about sexuality? But if Jesus did rise from the dead, if the God of the Bible is real and he's Lord of the world, and he is the one who became human and gave up his life to save it, then our place in that is to be grateful, obedient creatures. And that means that we do as he says, and that's whether we like it or whether we understand it. Like, thankfully he is good. He's not some cruel tyrant. He's not like indifferent or distant or anything like that. He's a good father. Something in Psalm 145, I think it's verse 17, it says, the Lord is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. Like, that's the God that we're talking about. So I think that's the central question. Like, is this God real? Did Jesus rise from the dead? If so, then yeah, he says some things about sexuality. He also says some things about every other area of your life, and we're going to need to talk about all of that. This is going to upend your whole life following him. But that's the central question, and I think that's where we need to refocus, because ultimately that's the one that matters.
I suppose I've got a couple of reflections on this. One of the things that really excites me is, effectively for 20 centuries, people who were in same-sex relationships have become Christians. I just love the fact that even in the first century church, Paul can say, can include same-sex sexual relations in a list of sins and say, and that is what some of you were. And so actually it seems in the first century, people became Christians out of same-sex sexual activity. And quite encouragingly, I think 2,000 years later that's still happening, because I know some of them. And one of the things I really love actually about the sort of group of people who speak for Living Out is, I think roughly we're sort of 50-50 in terms of our stories, actually, in terms of people like me who've never had a same-sex sexual relationship, but then others who have and have subsequently become Christians. And so I just don't think it's the case this stops people becoming Christians, because for 2,000 years they have. My other reflection, I'd love to get you guys to talk about this as well, is it seems fairly powerless to have a Christian message that is basically, hey, let's just reaffirm everything that culture says. I mean, why become a Christian if it's simply going to be exactly the same? And it seems to me that we've got something quite remarkable to say about things like sexuality and identity, that to actually make those the driving force of your life, strangely, isn't the ultimate guide to happiness. And my fear is actually if you change your position, it's kind of saying, it basically affirms that view, and then there's nothing distinctive to say. Do you think that might resonate with people in our culture, the fact that sexuality, identity isn't the essence of who we are? Does that have power, do you think, Ashleigh?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of young people, and I am seeing more and more of just a disillusionment with those kind of views that have been so much the norm for the last 5 or 10 years. But we're seeing how inadequate they are. We are seeing how making sexuality the core of who you are, or making your own search for identity the center of your life, those things are just inadequate. So yeah, I think we're definitely starting to see that. And I think you're so right, Andy. Like, there is so much good and so much hope in the Christian message. And that comes in part from how countercultural it is. We're going, look, we've got different answers, and that they're better answers. They're the answers that God has given us, not the answers that we're trying to scrabble around and find for ourselves. And I think people are really responding, or do respond, as you've said, for the last 2,000 years, have been responding to those kind of messages of hope that come out of seeing the world completely differently.
Yeah, because if we're telling people, okay, actually the purpose of life is your sexual fulfillment, well, where does that end? Okay, maybe it's when you're young, it's about ticking off as many sexual partners as you can. Then it's about finding like the one. But the problem is, after a while, you might get bored of the one, and so you think, okay, is the one actually the many? Is it about finding many sexual partners, or is it about moving on to the next sexual partner? Or what happens when there's a time in your relationship where your sex life is hard and it's unfulfilling, or what happens if that time just keeps on dragging on? Like, actually, it starts to create this really uh like view of the world where you just have to ditch people when they're no longer like sexually satisfying you, and that's a horrible, empty sort of view of life and reality. And actually, the Christian sexual ethic, that life is not actually all about our sexual fulfillment, is such good news to every single person. It's good news if you've got a great sex life, and it's good news if you don't have a sex life at all, or it's good news if you're someone who really struggles with your sexuality, because actually it's saying that your value, your worth, isn't based on how many sexual partners you have or how good your sex life is. It's based on how Jesus Christ sees you and what he's done for you, and how he makes you into one of his brothers or sisters.
There's a line I started to use at events recently, which I think has got some traction, to essentially say to people, if sexual freedom, or the ability to live out your sexual identity, is the key to flourishing and happiness, we should be the happiest generation in human history, because never before has there been so much freedom. And for as you say that, you see people clocking, oh, we're not, which kind of indicates that it really isn't the key to happiness and flourishing. And the problem is, if we simply absorb the same sexual ethic as everybody else, we don't get the ability to say that. We don't get the ability to point to something different. And my guess is there are one or two secular voices who are beginning to clock that as well. You both have read quite a bit more of Louise Perry than I have. So either of you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, you're so right, Andy. There are some secular voices which are starting to pick up, like Louise Perry, The Case Against Sexual Revolution. Like, it is just absolutely incredible that someone coming from a secular worldview would actually conclude that marriage is a good thing. It's incredible when you consider like the liberal culture, but it's not incredible when you consider that actually the goodness of God's plan for sexuality and for marriage isn't just good because he says it's good. It's actually good when it's lived out. And this is Louise is starting to pick up on that, and is starting to defend it.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for giving us the opportunity to talk about Louise Perry, because I love this book. I actually think it's fantastic. I'll sit there and read it in one day because it's just so compelling, and so as Adam's just said, the fact that she starts from this very secular perspective, but then her final chapter is called "Marriage is Good" in this book, and she's talking about how this sexual revolution kind of from the 60s onwards has failed, and how bad it is for women in particular, and how actually the best thing statistically for women, for children, for society as a whole is for sexual relationships to be happening in the context of a monogamous marriage. I find it so fascinating that someone who is a secular feminist kind of lands where we land on sexual ethics. I think she actually has, since publishing this in 2022, we're now at the end of 2025 recording this, she's just become a Christian, which is very exciting. But definitely at the time of writing, she was not professing any kind of faith. Anyway, yeah, it is so interesting and compelling that kind of secular science and secular statistics are with the Bible on this. Like, it's not just us kind of saying, no, we've got this ancient text and it says that this way is better. Like, we can actually see it playing out in society, in real lives, that the way of God is better. And I find that so helpful and so wonderful.
One of the Bible passages we go to quite a lot as a Living Out team is John chapter 4, Jesus meeting the woman at the well. And I almost think that story is almost a picture of our culture, actually. So, if you like, the woman has had her own sexual revolution, married 5 times now with a man, not a husband, huge sexual freedom, and yet is still thirsty. And I just think that's almost an image of where we are culturally. We've had the freedom to express our identity. We've had great sexual freedom, and yet it's hard to deny that as a culture we're still thirsty, and it's into that context that the Lord Jesus can offer us the living water that leads to eternal life, knowing God our Creator forever. And so all of that just gives me confidence that, far from needing to be on the sort of back foot and defensive, thinking, no, we're not harming people, actually the Christian sexual ethic and the one to whom it points is just glorious good news for all of us. So hopefully you'll have picked up that, though there are some short-term costs for us, actually all of us are convinced that the Christian sexual ethic has done us good, and we want to be those who communicate that to a culture that is still thirsty. And actually a very different view can help us with evangelism rather than hinder it. Now, as we've gone through, if that's thrown up questions for you, or actually as you look through the episodes, you see objections that we're not raising, please do get in touch with us. You can do that via the Living Out website. The link will appear in the show notes. Do throw us questions that we might either handle in a blog or in a special podcast episode, because we do want to make sure that we're actually dealing with the objections people have rather than the ones we think people have. So please do get in touch. And do like us and subscribe so that you know when the next episode is around. The next episode will deal with the question, isn't this a question of social justice? Isn't this unfair to hold the view we do? And that'll be the next episode in a couple of weeks' time. But in the meantime, Adam and Ashleigh, thank you so much for joining us, and to you listening, thank you for being with us. Goodbye.